Hi, Andy. Sorry about that technical issue.
That's okay. Thanks, John. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today for the latest Centis webinar. Apologies, we're a couple of minutes late in starting. We had a last-minute technical glitch, but we're off and running now. As we go through the course of the webinar, we hope that we'll inspire some questions. And if you could make a note of those questions for us and type them into the chat box that's available, either as we're going or at the end, that would be really much appreciated. So let's kick off with the webinar today. And the focus today is all about people and creating high performance, successful teams, avoiding some of the pitfalls of dysfunctional teams and issues with individuals. So we're often told that our teams, our people, are our greatest asset. Well, we 100% disagree with that. And the way we think about it is that your ability to attract, to develop and retain great people is the asset. So today is about helping you develop that asset. Finding the right people and developing them is really tough, and it's an uncertain aspect of business, but it's vital to your success. And this is because our behavior, people's behavior, is driven by their unconscious, which can make them difficult to understand. And it may be that as leaders, we're reacting to the way our people behave, and our reactions are driven by our unconscious. And you can see how that can spiral and make managing people very difficult. It was Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, who said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life. And we simply call it fate. But it's not fate. Something's driving that pattern within us. So today's webinar is about understanding the challenges in more detail and finding out a little bit about what we can do about those challenges. We're going to approach this as an informal Q&A between John and myself. So, John, if it's okay, I'd like to come to you and just get your background in terms of the challenges that you experience. Obviously, you've been in business 100 years now, so you've come across a lot of business owners. Over the years, what are the businesses that you've worked with where people or teams have become a real challenge?
Well, have I come across that, you say? Yeah, that's the understatement of the year. You see in every single meeting I have with clients, every peer board that I go to, whether that's TAB or Business Exposure Group or whatever, and even on a social side, if I'm having a beer at the bar in the rugby club and the conversation turns to business, then without doubt, the one thing that we talk about is dysfunctional teams, and there's always some team member who is annoying one of the business owners, not to the point usually getting sacked, to be fair, but usually just that they're just not doing their job right. And we're interested in those stories because we've all got similar ones ourselves, and we can empathize with that. And so there's the usual pity party. Someone holds court and tells us about the latest employee that they've got that's driving them insane. The theme is always the same. It's square pegs in round holes.
Yeah. So can you give us some examples?
Yeah, how long have you got? Hundreds. I guess one from a few years ago always sticks in my mind. A couple of directors that were pals of mine as well. They had it was an IT business, and they had a field sales guy who was given a budget to obviously create a certain amount of sales per month. And they were whinging that he knew the product inside out, was the best qualified to do these kind of sales. He couldn't sell a life raft to a drowning man apparently, and he was utter rubbish. And again, whinging, and in that case, they were actually going to get rid of the guy. Yeah, that one really sticks out for me. I guess recently speaking to a business that we're doing some strategy work with, quite high. So they have strategy meetings on a weekly and a monthly basis. They've got a line manager there, department manager, and when they have these strategy meetings, she sits in the meeting and is just kind of passive, doesn't say anything, doesn't challenge anything, and it comes across as actually being a little bit bored. Another example, a friend of mine from the rugby club, he was telling me about this sales guy he's got. He's good at selling, but apparently he's a royal pain in the proverbial. He's generally a bit scatty. They never know where he is. He doesn't keep the CRM up to date. He comes into the office every now and again and has unfiltered, inappropriate banter. He talks too much, disrupts, and again, the other department heads are beginning really not to like him. And they like his sales performance, but his personality is a bit overbearing. There's loads of examples, but there's three reasonable ones for you.
Yeah. So those are examples about the team. What about the leaders themselves?
Yeah, I mean, there's disruptive leaders as well. We're doing one right at the moment, which is a zero installation with an operations director. Conversation soon turned to the atmosphere in the office because the MD came in, didn't say hello to us, walked straight into his office, got himself a cup of coffee, didn't offer anybody else one. Got on with his work, and she just moaning that if they have a meeting with him, he's generally working on his computer on something else. Then when the subject turns to him, he's he rushes it forward. He doesn't really listen, likes to get his own way, and moves things on before people are ready either. A finance director that I've been working with for a few years, he's got a boss that's very entrepreneurial, and we had a meeting about 2 or 3 weeks ago. He actually didn't turn up for the meeting. Something more interesting had cropped up. And that started the conversation about how everything's at 100 miles an hour. He's got 10 different things on the go at the same time. Something shiny pops up that looks like it could be a good investment. He'll get involved in that. And he's just got this kind of trail of destruction behind him as he's just moving at 100 miles an hour. And whenever people have complained about this in the past, the reaction can be, look, I'm the visionary. I'm driving the business forward. All I need you guys is to support me. What's the problem? So yeah, you get disruption at board level as well as amongst the team themselves.
Yeah. So let me ask a bit of a cheeky question then, John. Do you see any of that in yourself?
What, the last one? Yeah. Okay. Certainly as a younger man, yeah, I've still got that in me. I'm still capable of it, but the difference is that I'm conscious of it now, and so I kind of regulate my my conduct to look after that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So one opportunity for business owners is recruitment, to develop their team and develop the company. So what sort of feedback do you get from business owners on how well recruitment's working for them?
At best, mixed, and generally poor, and a bit of a luck of the draw. I mean, I guess I could reflect on myself here. I was a really poor recruiter. I did all the recruitment myself, which I don't think is a good idea. It definitely isn't in hindsight. I did far too much talking in the interview. I got more excited about them getting the job than they were excited about it themselves. I often impulsively offered the job to the candidate actually in the meeting. And because I was worried that they might leave and I'd miss the opportunity. And they'd go and work for somebody else. So I was the classic, hire on personality quickly, and then, fire very slowly on ability. So no, I wasn't great at it. I was too arrogant. I think I just thought that I was a good judge of character, and that's all I needed to be in the meeting.
Okay. And what did you do as the costs of that turnover escalated and the disruption from it increased? When it became a real issue, what did you do?
Well, I guess the first thing I did is that I was the one holding court at the pity party, telling the story about how I'd recruited this person, and they were a disaster for me. I took some advice, and I did a lot of the stuff that my peer group did. I threw more money at it, thinking that might be the solution. So engaged with more expensive recruitment consultants, headhunters in the end. Paid more money, thought that might be the solution. I kind of looked at myself a bit more as well, and my own management style, and was I causing the problem? Was it the way that I was conducting myself? I got involved in some fairly faddish management techniques, and probably came across as totally unauthentic in the process, and really didn't enjoy it. Caused me a lot of stress and problems, and had some outrageous thoughts like maybe I just shouldn't employ anybody at all. In the end, I think I just resigned myself to the fact that it was just fate. It was luck of the draw. I'm going to get 50% of my team are going to be great, and I'm never going to want them to leave. And there's always going to be, well, maybe more than that, 75%. There's always going to be a small proportion that were going to be a thorn in my side. The ones that you kind of drive home from work, grinding your teeth and thinking about why aren't they behaving this certain way. Just accept the fact that it was, going back to what I said earlier, you just have to accept you've got square pegs in round holes, and that's your lot.
Okay. So what's your perspective on the level of leadership skills that you see among business owners?
Well, I trained I started work in the 80s, late 80s, 90s, and that was all command and control, the mushroom theory of management, keep everyone in the dark and then dump a load of shit on them every now and again. Thankfully, all that's behind us. And obviously, with the advent of the internet and the freely available information on how to become a better leader, that's improved things. But I think in general, leaders are just a lot better anyway. Culturally, things have changed. The millennium generation have come through into management now. They're a lot better employee engagement and employee well-being than the bosses that I had when I trained. And I also think that the best leaders in businesses are prepared to invest in frameworks and tools to not just in recruitment, but in all aspects of their business. They're prepared to make that investment and put that time in. It kind of reminds me of that, I love a quote, Andrew, that I think it's Jim Rohn who said there are two types of pain in life: the pain of discipline and the pain of regret. And discipline weighs ounces and regret weighs tons. And I think people recognize that. Being a good leader, some people are natural, and great, but most of us aren't. You've got to work really hard at it. And it's usually from the scars on your back, the experience that you've had in making mistakes. And that's one way to do it. But, there's lots of material out there, books, programs you can follow, advice from people like us. And in general, I think that, they're a lot better. And as I say, the best leaders, they're making that investment in the processes and systems.
So you've been very honest and open there, John, about some of the challenges that you faced in your business and some of your own learning experiences. So what changed to turn that around for you?
Well, it was simple for recruitment. It was DISC. What we're here today to talk about. It was a life-changing process that we brought into the business in terms of our team building, harmony, and just having a highly functioning team in the firm.
Okay. So thanks, John. You've given us some great examples. And you've been open and shared some of your own learning experiences. And from my own experience working with business owners, those things resonate. I just want to make sure that for those of you that are listening, to see if those things resonate with you. So a quick reminder that if you've got questions, to put them into the chat space. But I'd just like you to put into the chat space a yes if you recognize what John's been describing and it resonates with you, or a no if actually you think that's something that you don't experience. So if you could just take a few seconds to put that in there. Okay, so we've got yes, 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 and yes. And not at that stage yet. So, so I think from our perspective, hopefully we can prepare you for some of those challenges as they come up. So thank you for that. Just make sure that we clear that the sort of challenges we're describing do resonate with you guys. So what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about what John touched on then in terms of psychometrics. What are they? What's this DISC thing? And how might DISC help you with these sorts of people challenges? So if you think back, think about a time when you've worked with someone who was always skeptical and always seemed to somehow resist change. Or maybe there was someone who appeared to lack any drive or enthusiasm. And again, maybe you remember working with someone who felt like they were overly animated, overly adventurous. And I think we've all had the experience of working with people who are so driven and results focused that actually they just don't seem to care about the people around them. For them, it's all about the results and people don't matter. And obviously that's a tough experience. Well, it turns out that in all people, there are 4 broad patterns of behavior and an outlook on life that are hardwired into all of us. And psychologists call these psychometrics. So psychometrics are a set of unconscious preferences which influence how we each approach everything we do. So this is not just a pattern that we see at work. It's a pattern that influences everything we do. Every decision, large or small, home or work, are influenced by these patterns. Because they're unconscious, we're not aware that it's happening. And as Carl Jung said, until you make that process conscious, it directs your life, but you just think it's fate. We just think, chance and circumstance have brought us to this point. But in reality, it's actually these patterns that are influencing us, the people around us, and our teams. And a good way of explaining how psychometrics work is using this analogy. So we and our conscious mind, we're the person, the business owner riding this elephant. We think we're in control. We're making conscious, rational decisions. And we're thinking about the longer term. But actually, our psychometrics are at play. And they're represented by the elephant. And that's unconscious, and it's impulsive, it's emotional, and it's driven by this pattern. And if you think about this, actually, what's the chance that you can push this elephant in the direction you want to go? And when it comes to a battle, it's the elephant that always wins. These these forces, these patterns are incredibly strong. They're always there. So we need to be really aware of them. Now, we're all a blend of these 4 styles, these 4 patterns of behavior, but we do all have a dominant style. And there are strengths and weaknesses to each of the profiles, to each of these styles or sets of preferences. So they all have strengths and weaknesses. We're not saying one style is better than another. We're saying that you need to be aware of your unconscious style. And DISC is one way of representing these psychometrics. And each letter stands for one of the 4 main styles. And this is one of the most widely used systems in the world of work in particular. So what I'd like to do is maybe try and bring each of these 4 styles alive by relating them to some people that we all know. So starting with D, if you think about that real strong, competitive, driving force in a business, an example of Steve Jobs at Apple is, a great example of the D profile. And then we've got a natural leader like Michael Jordan, able to lead a team at, world-class performance level, but also then go on and become a world-class business leader in his own right. So really positive characteristics of the D profile. But then we start to see the D spill over somewhat. So Gordon Ramsay is well known for the excellence of his food and the success of his restaurants. But he's also really well known for his driving behavior, for his challenging nature. And sometimes that perhaps spills over. And then the ultimate in the dark side of the D profile, where the style is very fixed, where there's only one way, and that's to tell you how it's going to be, is the ultimate expression from a D perspective. Thinking about the I profile, again, we've got really positive examples like Richard Branson, his vision for the future, new ideas, constantly changing that business and reinventing Virgin in different markets, always on to the next challenge, and a great showman. And, show people are often show characteristics of the I profile. You see this level of animation, you see the natural warmth and the enthusiasm for engaging with other people. And Dolly Parton here's, must be one of the most outgoing people that you can imagine. But again, the I profile has some challenges. People with the I profile often really like to be liked, and that can take their behavior down a path that's not always right for the situation. And again, perhaps ultimately, there's a way of expressing the I profile which is too outgoing, that talks over people, that doesn't listen, and continues down a train of thought, whether it's appropriate or not, disregards the results that are being achieved. If we move around to the S profile, the fantastic example in Princess Diana of that caring and nurturing side that the S profile has, really wanting to help other people, prepared to put other people first. And another great example of David Beckham shows us how subtle some of these profiles can be. So on the football field, as captain of his country, he's a real driven character, really wants to win. But in his private life, he's in the background. And he's very private about the work he's done for UNICEF over the years and other charities. But that drive to support other people is really strong, but very prepared to stay in the background, not looking for recognition for that support. And again, that can lead to challenges for the S profile. So people with the S profile sometimes avoid facing up to the harsh reality of the situation. And in this case, a character like Anthony Eden, who, just didn't face up to the realities that were playing to pretty much everybody else around him at the time. And a final example where the S profile can become overly nervous, overly worried about change, about life, about work in general, and can project that anxiety onto other people. And then coming around to the C profile, or conscientious, C profile people are great problem solvers. They love to think through a problem in detail. They can be very analytical. They love a process. They love to uncover how things work. So Einstein, an example, and the problem-solving approach that he took to physics is a great example. And again, that analytical nature, Bill Gates thinking about computing, taking this new science and applying it to the market, but not in a limited way, with great vision, with great potential and great drive, but absolutely a quiet analytical approach to the opportunity. And again, a slight potential weakness with the C profile is that because of that analytical nature, they can sometimes appear to be quite cold, quite unbending, very resistant to change. Someone like Angela Merkel has a reputation for being that sort of character. And finally, the C profile, again, can become very change resistant, can only see the negatives in the situation. And that comes through with a perspective, it's perceived to be something which is perhaps holding a team back or is resistant to change in a deliberate way. And that might not be the case. It's unusual if it is the case, but the perception is the C profile is scared of change, doesn't want any change to happen, and can only see bad things. So they have that real negative perspective. So these are people that we all know, and it's easy to see the negatives in the profiles in these sort of fictional characters. But those negatives are there potentially in every profile. So we recognize them in these people because they're famous and we know their characters. But I want to give you some examples of how you can recognize these patterns in people that you meet for the first time. People you've no idea who they are, but you can read the underlying profile within them really quite quickly. If we think about the 4 profiles again, I want you to imagine that you're at a business conference and it's just come up to the break time for one of the conference events. And you're observing a crowd of people coming out of this business conference and they're heading towards the lifts. And you're stood back to one side observing these people. And you notice that one person strides out ahead of this group. And they stride purposely forward ahead of the crowd. And they get to the lift. They jab the lift button, not once, but 3 times. The lift's already on its way, but they give it a couple more jabs just to make sure. The lift doors open and they get in, they go straight inside and they hit the close button, just as other people arriving at the lift. And these people are a little bit annoyed because clearly they could have got into the lift, but this one person has closed the doors and off they go. We would anticipate that that person is a D profile. And on that basis, we've now identified quite an insight into them. So we can, if we chose to, handle them in a way which would make them feel very comfortable, use language and adopt a style ourselves which would suit them, and establish an immediate rapport and establish a good working relationship with them. So let's imagine that in this crowd of people that are now stood outside the lift, you notice one character who takes the opportunity while they wait for the lift to start a conversation up with the people around him. And start a conversation and chatting to one or two people. Then as they enter the lift, they maintain those conversations, even though the other people are feeling a little bit uncomfortable and slightly shuffling to one side away from them. They keep those conversations going. And when the lift arrives at the floor and somebody, as part of these conversations, steps out, they step out too, and they put their hand up on the lift door and hold the lift open so that they can finish the conversation. This person's heading down the corridor trying to get away from them, but they just want to finish that conversation. Meanwhile, everyone in the lift is waiting, a little bit frustrated now that they can't get moving again. So that person is probably an I profile. And again, you've developed a real insight into them and how you might adapt and work with them. So we now see the second group who've waited for the lift, and they're now approaching their turn to get into the lift. And you notice one person in that crowd is struggling with a couple of large bags full of papers. And you notice someone approach them and offer them some help. And actually, when the people get into the lift, this person waits and helps them carry their second heavy bag into the lift. By this time, the lift's full. And when they put the second heavy bag into the lift, there's no space for them. So they say, never mind, I'll get the stairs. And they start to walk up the stairs. You know that person is probably an S profile. Their drive to support someone else has overridden their need to get into the lift to get to wherever they're going. So you can see, again, the insight that you've developed about that individual just by observing them. And finally, we come round to the C profile, conscientiousness. And you notice someone stood at the back of the group, stood slightly separately from the group, and you can see them doing some sort of mental calculation. And they're assessing the people in the crowd, trying to work out how many people there are and whether they're average size humans, because they're referencing that to the weight limit on the lift. They're assessing whether it's safe for them to use the lift if all of those people get in there. And they may or may not decide to get into the lift or take the safer route, which is the stairs. But they stood to one side, quietly, internally, doing that calculation. You know that person is a C profile. And again, you've developed a considerable insight to that person, just in terms of observing their behavior. What's driving that behavior for them are their psychometrics, these preferences within them. They may well not be aware of it. Most people aren't. But you can see how that set of psychometrics drive the way they respond just to that small scenario. So that's how I like to bring the four profiles apart, to bring them alive. But John, if you were to explain the four profiles, how would you approach it?
Yeah, I always use my pool party example. So you went dominant, influential, steadiness, and conscientious. I'm going to go the other way around. Start with the steadiness person. So you arrive at a pool party, go through the back gate. There's a there's a barbecue going and the people around the pool. The S person is the steadiness person, is the one that's probably sat on the lounger chatting quietly to somebody else. Maybe goes over to help, take some things to the barbecue as she's called across or he's called across to try and be equal. And that kind of person is just fairly low profile. Then you've got the conscientious person. They're probably walking around by themselves and dipping the toe in the water, checking the temperature, making sure that the life raft by the side of the pool is in good working order and has been serviced recently. Probably wandering over to annoy the guy on the barbecue to make sure the chicken's cooked thoroughly. Generally keep themselves to themselves, having very serious conversations. The person on the barbecue, that's the dominant person. No one's allowed to touch what's going on and don't pass any opinion on it because this guy knows exactly what he's doing. He's generally ordering people around as well, shouting at his wife, who's the S type that's sat down just trying to be charismatic with everybody and make sure everyone's got their drinks and that kind of thing. And then the back gate bursts open. Some guy comes in with inflatables and a guitar, dive bombs into the deep end, jumps out, gets absolutely ruined. He's the life and soul of the party. But boy, does everybody look forward to when his taxi arrives at 6 o'clock and he goes home. That's your I person.
Yeah. So great descriptions. It's interesting how differently we approach explaining the 4 profiles. So perhaps that approach reflects our profiles. So what I'd like to do is just run a really quick question, a question poll to say, what profile do you think John is? And what profile do you think I am? So if you wouldn't mind answering that question for us. Just wait for the questions to come through.
That's nearly right for me. Yeah, it's pretty right.
Yeah.
That is.
So we'll just wait a few more seconds if you could complete your polling.
Just while people are completing that disc assessment of you and I, Andy, and just to kind of move things along, we've looked at some fairly amusing examples, of Darth Vader and Donkey and what have you, and the lift and the pool party. But in practical terms, though, how we're talking about building teams and how to have a highly functioning team. And highly functioning teams, there's lots of positive stuff, but there's some negatives. How do you avoid recruiting the wrong person? I was having this conversation and I gave the pool party example to tech business down in Poole a couple of weeks ago, and they're recruiting for a data processor. So this is going to be, obviously, this is going to be a C-type person. It's going to be a conscientious person, someone who's very precise and diligent and analytical. What are the dangers of recruiting somebody with the wrong personality type, and how might each one of those people react to work if it's to avoid the proverbial square peg in round holes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question, John, and it is a question that a dilemma we all face with recruitment. So from a recruitment perspective, I would always recommend that you get a DISC profile completed for everyone that you want to shortlist and take to second interview. And what DISC does is tell you if someone will be naturally comfortable in a particular type of role. So a data processor, for example, you might expect a C to be most comfortable in that sort of a role. Certainly a C profile with potentially someone in the S profile, you would expect them to be naturally more comfortable and therefore for them to thrive in that sort of role. But it's not as clear cut as that, because someone with a D profile could make a great data processor. So could someone with an I profile or an S profile. But what it does at the recruitment stage is it tells you the questions you need to ask. For example, if you find that you are interviewing an I profile for the data processing role, you know to ask them certain questions about evidence from their past where they've coped with that sort of a internal role. You can ask them about their strategies for maintaining their attention to the detail. And an I profile with some way of working which shows that they can stay focused to the detail may well still be successful in that role. But it takes a really unusual person with an I profile to really enjoy and thrive in a data processing type role. So it's not a black and white thing. We're not saying that if someone's got a C profile, then they have to do a data processing type job, or else all accountants would be Cs, for example. But we know that other profiles bring different characteristics to the role. But as an individual, they have to be able to convince you that they can compensate for the natural pattern of their profile in a particular role. If you recruited, let's say, an I profile into that role, you might find that they get bored quickly. You might find that they need lots of variety. You might find that actually they're not diligent and they're not therefore effective at the role. They might be very clever, very intelligent, very capable, but despite their best efforts, they just don't deliver consistently in that role. And where you've got that square peg in a round hole, it's really, really difficult to turn it around. And that's where all the challenges and the frustration and the cost of the wrong recruitment comes. So hopefully that would help that in that example.
Yeah.
I think I might need to. So in terms of the poll, thank you for responding to that. In terms of the responses we've got, I can see that there's a sense that I might be in the bottom half of the DISC profile and John might be in the top half. My approach is typical of someone in the lower half, and John's approach is typical of someone in the top half. And with DISC and using it in this live way, i.e. using it in a live conversation, it's often enough to know that someone is in the top half or the bottom half, or they're probably on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. And we can still adjust our approach to connect with them more strongly based on very little information. So thank you for taking that poll. So, John, I want to come back to some of the examples that you gave us earlier on. You gave some examples of in the context of work, seeing people who are square pegs in round holes. Could you tell us a little bit more about one of those examples?
Yeah. Let's hide the IT guy's name. Let's call him Bob.com. So Bob was the IT field sales guy. Actually, Bob was their best engineer, and he actually fitted quite a lot of stuff for us at Ascentis, and he was brilliant. Did all of our AV stuff, and he was reasonably warm and he was pleasant. But I knew him. He wasn't, and he did know the product inside out, and he loved describing it to you as well. He really knew his stuff. But they gave him because he was out on the road. They decided that, well, if you're out on the road, you know the product. Who better else to sell it than you? It's really technical stuff, and you can describe it. But he absolutely hated it. Although he loved the product and he was a diligent, precise, focused person, he really did not like the dynamic that was created between him and a customer when he then had the job of actually persuading them to do something that potentially he thought they maybe didn't want to do. He just didn't like that vulnerability that it placed himself in. And although he did do some sales, and we often talk in DISC about being rooted to a particular place on the DISC board, if you like. And he was firmly a C. So he was kind of like, if it's a clock, he was right at 7:30 on the very edge. And he was being asked to sell. So to go into a high I position, a polarized position from where he was. And whilst he would stretch himself every now and again, particularly when the month end was coming up, it just spring right back into that character that he was. And the directors of this IT company had just completely misjudged what his skill set was and what his best way of operating was. They did actually part company in the end, in that example, and he went to a competitor. So yeah, and as far as the S, I'll give you another example. I think we've got a bit of time. The other example was the line manager who just came across as passive, disinterested in the meetings and not paying attention and not making any contribution. That person was an S type, a supportive person. So they actually were very interested. They were paying attention. They just weren't as outgoing and expressive with that interest. And they were listening very attentively and, supporting the ideas. They didn't want to interrupt and they wanted to go along with the flow. That person actually, we're in the throes of that. Actually, that's a fairly contemporary example. The IT guy was a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's just DISC is not just about recruitment. It's about understanding what everybody's individual working style is, and what the communication that you're best suited to amongst your team, and how you create that harmony, and and empathizing, understanding one another, so that you don't misjudge somebody. So what we're trying to do with that director now is help him understand that the line manager, just because they're quiet, does not mean to say that they're not paying attention. They are. They're just not a D or an I person that wants to interrupt and say, I've got an idea, or how about we do this? Or they're just going along with the program and thinking, right, okay, I'm on board. I'm going to support you. Just a couple of examples.
Thanks, John. That's great.
Just one thing, just one final thing to say is, quick tool that I've got, if you're trying to work out very quickly what kind of person somebody is, split that circle in two, right in the middle. So you've got a top half and a bottom half. If the person comes across as being fairly outspoken and it's a pretty high tempo, they're going to be a D or an I. So you've got them in the top. Now think about the next stage. Are they warm and receptive to you, or are they quite skeptical and maybe reserved? If they're skeptical and reserved, they're now on the left-hand side and they're a D or a C. If they're warm and receptive and friendly, then you've got an I or an S. So if you've got someone that's outgoing and high-paced, high tempo, and they're warm and receptive, you got an I. and you can work out the other ones very easily yourself.
Okay, that's really useful, John. Thank you. So I think it would be good now for us to hear from an example of a business owner that's been through this process of using DISC, and this is just over a minute, where it's an example of someone that's been through the process.
As a team, one of the things that Ascentis brought to us was DISC analysis, which is psychometric profiling, something that I had never really bought into. I'd heard about previously until I had it explained to me the sorts of values that it could bring. We started with a DISC analysis of myself and Andy, my business partner, and they were so accurate in what they said and the approaches that they predicted we would have to different situations. It really flipped my thinking. We then profiled the whole team, and what we got from that was a really deep understanding of how the team dynamics work and where we had gaps in that team, and gave us an insight into the sorts of people that we should be looking to hire, and not just the skill sets, but the way of thinking that we needed to hire to round the team.
So there's an example of from a guy, a company called Creoda, a digital marketing company, and their team of digital marketing experts are the core machine within that business. Real technical experts. What they were able to do is to build that team, retain that team, and increase the effectiveness with which that team worked based on the new insights that they gained. It did lead to some changes in the team, but it has helped them go from strength to strength. So we've now got a few minutes before we come to the end of the webinar. So I'd love to see if there are any questions about what we've covered today. Okay, so we've got a typical Yorkshireman's question: how much does it cost, and how much do I get, and how do I get started? So yeah, great Yorkshireman's question. An individual DISC profile, the investment level's less than £100, and I would say the best place to get started is to do your own profile as the business owner or the business leader. That will give you an immediate experience of the insights that come from DISC profiling, and allow you to review your own leadership style and your own relationships with your team, whether that's a senior management team or individuals in your team, or even customers. It'll allow you to do a sense check on how effective those relationships are for you. If, however, you have a particular challenge in the team, a conflict issue or an opportunity to develop someone, or you have a recruitment challenge, then I would say the best thing to do is to look at that specific challenge and develop a project plan around it, which includes DISC profiling. So, but a great question. We've got a quick question. I can see how this works maybe for medium or large businesses, but does it work for small businesses? My take on that is, if you imagine bringing the wrong person into a team of 3 people, the impact is absolutely massive. But if you bring one wrong person into a team of 30, actually that team can cope. And over time, they'll either modify that person or ease them out. But if you bring them into a small team, in a small business, it's a massive, massive impact. We have question about the recording, so you can discuss with other people, absolutely happy to share that. And there's more information on our website, or you can drop any of the team an email and we can pick up any other questions that you have. So we're just about at time there. So I'd like to thank you all for your time and your attention and your questions. Hope that that's been useful. If you'd like any more information, just drop us a line and we'll come back to you. But for now, thank you, and look forward to seeing you in the next event or webinar. Okay. Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, John.